The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining this session. We appreciate you're busy with your day-to-day routine. I'm really excited with an opportunity to demonstrate you tools, techniques, and features used during a common cyber attack and ways to get an upper hand against those. Let me start with a bit of a bio, followed by a quick problem definition, and then the simulation itself. I'm a senior pre-sales specialist at Cybereason and one of the good guys working tirelessly to give our customers the upper hand against adversaries. Almost 20 years in IT and extensive experience in cybersecurity allow me to understand how to defend your organization against the next generation of cyber threats. My name is Pavel Mucha, and I wanted to thank you again for joining us today. Let's begin our session with a problem definition. Currently, most businesses spend about 80% of their cybersecurity budget on building the wall. Things like next-gen firewall, IPS, sandboxing, and antivirus, all that Gen 1, Gen 2 security stuff, trying to achieve the goal of stopping the bad guys from getting in. But we all know this doesn't work. The Great Wall of China is an enigma, right the way through to recent big new cyber attacks like we saw at BA and Google. Don't get me wrong, both the victims I just mentioned had the best of breed technology making up this wall. But whether the attacker goes under, over, or through your wall, a determined one is going to ultimately get in. It's just a matter of time and he gets lucky. Or smart. After that, once they're inside, we're blind. We rely on AV or host IPS to detect something suspicious and stop it. Sure, we've got to have all of that, but I think we'd mostly agree that antivirus and IPS alone won't stop a modern targeted attack. Part of the problem is that the attacker only has to be lucky once. And we as defenders have to be lucky every single time. Companies then spend the remaining 20% of their cybersecurity budgets on trying to stop damage and loss of data. By that, I mean the stuff they need to clean up once an attack has happened. For example, SIEM tools to dig through logs, incident response services to try and contain an attack and identify the root cause. And the last one is DLP, to try and stop the data from being exfiltrated. Now, between the initial breach and actually doing damage to your business, there is a period where an attacker has to complete certain steps. We call these steps non-negotiables. They'll need to perform reconnaissance to know what the environment around them contains. They'll look to move laterally and gain higher levels of privilege in your environment. As the attacker steps through this process, it can be incredibly difficult to detect amongst all the noise what they're doing. These activities often have no signature for AV to catch and don't use any files that can be stopped by a firewall or sandbox. They won't even be seen on the network. Luckily for us, all of this takes time. And that can be anywhere from a matter of weeks to months or even longer. This is where Cybereason comes into play. By monitoring hundreds of metrics from every endpoint and using things like behavioral analysis and machine learning, our AI threat hunting platform will automatically identify these malicious operations in real time and alert the analyst. Now, because we collect so much telemetry from the endpoint, actually being able to automatically correlate and analyze this in real time is really hard. So when our founders looked at how to store and process the telemetry, they started by looking at traditional relational databases, such as the ones used in CM tools, or the ones leveraged by other products like Splunk. They also looked at big data solutions, such as Hadoop and Cassandra. What they found was that with having these flat files, it wasn't possible to correlate everything on every endpoint and to scale this out across thousands of endpoints in real time. Typically, a relational database maxes out at around 75,000-80,000 queries per second. And it really doesn't matter how much CPU horsepower you throw at it, because it's a limitation of that architecture. Joining tables just doesn't scale. This means that tools relying on relational databases have to make certain compromises, either by asking less questions of the data, which means we might miss something of significance, or to only analyze the data from one endpoint at a time, which would mean a separate alert coming from every endpoint that displayed suspicious behavior, which of course results in alert fatigue and a lot of noisy false positives. Essentially, what our founders realized was that this was a data problem, so that they actually spent the first 2 years developing a graph database capable of correlating many-to-many relationships at speed. And by building this graph database from the ground up and running it in memory, this gave them the ability to run 8 million queries per second, enough to cross-correlate every data point on every machine in real time. It's at least 100 times faster than the next nearest solution on the market today. So by being able to collect all relevant data from endpoints, we're able to see more. Then by correlating everything to give us a live snapshot of the enterprise, we are able to understand more. And of course, by being able to run as many queries as we like to detect suspicious activity on all endpoints in real time, we are able to stop more. So now, once we're all hopefully on the same page, let me jump into the attack simulation itself to demonstrate you what tools, techniques, and features can be used by both red and blue teams today in what could finally be called a fair cyber war. You're going to see a real-life attack in action. Also, how to defend and gain the upper hand over that attack. We've simulated a company with a couple of users. An advanced attacker may use some sort of social engineering, and the attacker did some basic external recon using social media resources like Facebook and LinkedIn to find out who the targets are. Maria is a CEO of the organization, and Robert is her executive assistant. I'm going to target Robert's machine in the initial phase of the attack, because I think he's a semi-low level user. He probably has to deal with multiple senior leaders on a daily basis, including CEO and hopefully several CFOs. Robert is overloaded with inbound emails and calendar management tasks, which, by the way, he complained about on his Facebook page. So he's very likely to open our phishing email. Ultimately, we want to get to Maria's CEO and steal some valuable data from her machine. Usually, this sort of a low and slow attack takes weeks and sometimes months. We've condensed what could have been low and slow attack down into few minutes. A lot of the tools and techniques that adversaries would use in a similar scenario are going to be demonstrated during our session today. So let's dig in. Our reference environment here consists of 3 machines. One is attacker Kali Linux machine and 2 victim machines. Robert Edwards machine and Maria Ross machine. Essentially, the scenario we will play out here is an attacker that is interested in getting information of target organization. The attacker sent out a few phishing emails to a number of target individuals in the organization. Metasploit is going to be the attacker's tool. As you can see here, I started a reverse handler on the attacker. The attacker is waiting for incoming connections. So if any one of those victims who they send the email to will actually click on the email, these will be generated. So our victim one, which is a Roberts machine. Here it is. He opened Outlook and he sees an email. This is the phishing email from the attacker. We see an attachment, an Excel attachment masquerading as a recruitment plan. We go ahead and double-click the attachment to open the document. We will enable editing, and because we're asked to, we will enable the content. Behind the scenes, what's happening is a stager. What we built into Excel is a macro code which is performing a DGA to find its command and control server to allow the attacker remote access into the compromised machine. DGA is an evasion technique, domain generation algorithm, for avoiding whitelisting solutions like proxies. Then it uses an inbuilt OS process called regsvr32 to download the payload and execute. It downloads the payload using bitsadmin. It then executes the payload using CS script. In this attack, we're leaving off the land by using the tools that already exist in victim's environment and do not require me running any additional files or programs, just using what's available within operating system's native toolset. We see here that a new session has opened, session 1. The attacker machine has connected to Robert's machine. From my attacker machine, I can see one victim clicked on the attachment, and I have one way into the environment through that victim. Now that I have landed in this environment, I'm going to perform two basic steps. The first thing I want to do here is figure out who the person is, who actually clicked on the phishing email. And the second thing I want to do is actually figure out what processes are running on his machine, because I want to lower the possibility of detection in this environment and detach myself from the vector of initial compromise. So I'll attach myself to this session 1, and I will run a simple command called getUserID to see whether I'm on the right machine. Now I know this is Robert's machine. I know he's an executive assistant based on the recon I've done before. I know he's not my direct victim, but he's a potential point of entry into the network. How do I move from this machine and go to one of my actual target machines? Right now, the attack is running as a child of regsvr32, which is CS script that executed the stager. That's the context I'm running the attack from. I want to move away from this very quickly, as CS script doesn't commonly communicate with external addresses. So I want to hide my operation in a context that's more commonly communicating with external network addresses. To do this, I want to first look at the processes running on Robert's machine. And in order to do that, I'll launch a simple command called ps. And it will show me all live processes running on Robert's machine at the moment. And I see one of them is a Firefox process. There we are. A browser is an ideal candidate to move my attack code into, because a browser normally connects to external addresses, right? It's a methodical step to maintain operational security in the network. I want to stay under the radar and move low and slow. I'm going to use a memory injection technique to further decrease the chance of being spotted. But before, I'll filter out the same request to show me only Firefox processes. So I can migrate onto the parent ID. And I can see that right now the main parent ID is 1432. And I'll migrate there. Now I'm running in a more reasonable context, okay? And I've detached myself from the initial compromise vector, and I did it all in memory without any files being touched. And I now can carry on with the rest of the operation. I know I'm not on one of my target machines. I know the CEO's machine in this case would be a good target, or several in finance would be good targets too. But I want to see which one of those machines are in my network environment. I perform some basic network reconnaissance and run a tool called NetView, which is a built-in capability on Windows machines. It initiates net bias discovery, a process machines do on a regular basis every few minutes. This allows it to learn what other Windows machines exist on the network around it. I'm going to disguise this as a normal net bias behavior and will look very normal. By the way, in my attack simulation, I've scripted exact commands to make it easier and save some time. So I'll use resource net bias scan .rc. Right, a little bit of a typo. Apologies. Okay, great. Oh, okay, fantastic. I can see there are two machines that are running in the network near me. Robert, which I'm already running on, and I can see one is Mariar CEO, which is one of my actual target machines. So the question I ask myself now is, how do I move laterally? Or in more technical terms, how do I accomplish remote code execution on Maria's machine? Looking at a couple of options, one is using SMBPSexec and provided with a password hash. Basically, pass the hash. There are a lot of advantages in using tools that are native to the environment instead of introducing new proprietary attack tools. The first is to lower the possibility of detection. The more proprietary tools you introduce, the more there is a cause for suspicions and high possibility of detection. I also want to leave as few uniquely identifiable digital fingerprints. The more proprietary tools are used in the attack, the easier it is to draw them back to the attacker or link them to other operations carried out by the same person. And the third is to actually avoid issues with whitelisting or next generation AVs. I don't want to risk being blocked. To use that tool, I also need to provide credentials which are needed to run the code on Maria's machine. A good place to look for credentials to laterally move onto Maria's machine are on the machine I'm currently running on Robert's machine. Because it can be either golden image or it can have some administrator-based processes running, or an administrator was simply doing something with his machine recently. So I can dump credentials of this machine. I can see which credentials are dumped on this machine from past or remote logon sessions, and see if these credentials can actually help me get into Maria's machine. But to dump credentials, I need to run in high privilege. I need to run as local admin, or at least a local system on the machine. Right now, I'm running as a restricted Robert user. Thus, my first step to facilitate that process is to try to escalate my privileges on this machine. So I'm going to close this common console session, and prior to doing this, I'm going to try to get some information on what Robert's machine specification looks like. I'll use sysinfo command. which is a part of sys internals. And as we saw, many organizations use it in their environments for administration. Let's give it a minute. Fantastic. I see it's a Windows 7 64-bit machine. I already have everything I need to know about this machine's weak points, as it is provided with Kali Linux's Metasploit. And I have a couple of local privilege escalation exploits that match this particular build number and patch level. So what I'm going to do is use one of the available exploits to try to escalate my privileges. So before that, I will background our initial session. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, I've scripted exact commands into RC files, so it's easier for me to showcase the actual attack rather than my scripting skills. In the background interpreter session here, I'm going to choose an exploit I want to use. Local privilege escalation. The specific one I want to use is MS1458, Windows pop-up exploit functionality. I'm setting the target to 1, which means it's targeting a 64-bit machine. I'm going to set the payload parameter, which is essentially what I want to run on the machine if the exploit is successful. And it will generate the backdoor, and it will load the malware called Meterpreter. This will give me access to the machine and a possibility to load any additional modules and attack functionality to anything I want. I have set the command and control server so that if the commands are successfully run, it will know where to connect, and the port number to connect to the command and control server. I'm going to set this to run on the unprivileged session with Robert, and I'm going to run it. And as we've seen, there is a new session now open. It's called session 2. And after successful privilege escalation, I'm going to check who I am on this machine, simply by using the same command we used before, get UID. Bingo. First, I was running as Robert E. limited user account, and now I'm running as local system. I was successfully able to escalate my privileges to the highest user on the machine. Now that I have elevated my privileges, my next step is going to be to add a user for persistence. I'm going to add a user called Ghost. Now that I have added a persistence point on this box, I'm going to dump password hashes of Robert's machine users to be able to run a pass the hash to move laterally to the CEO's machine. It's time to dump those password hashes from Robert's machine right now. Hash dump RC. That is great. Now that I have the password hashes, I can use the same to move laterally across the network using a pass the hash. Before I use the dumped hashes to move laterally, I want to disguise the activity through the network. Rather than directly passing the hash from the attacker machine, it would make more sense to pass the hash through the compromised victim instead. So I'm going to use Metasploit's inbuilt pivoting module called AutoRoute to route all my actions in this network through a compromised host. Think of the compromised victim behaving like a VPN for my activity. And let's not forget, we're leaving off the land and utilizing what's already running on the machine and relying mostly on fileless malware, not to be spotted by anything file system-wise. Resource autoroute.rc. Okay, so now that I have my traffic routed through the compromised victim, I will run the pass the hash module to laterally move into the CEO machine. So I'll background this specific session, and I will run a pass the hash technique. Giving it a minute here, you can see I have a new incoming session. Notice this is a different IP address from the one that we've been working with victim 1. So hopefully it all worked well. Now let's go ahead and perform some reconnaissance to confirm. So who do we have here? Who just connected to us? By the same, we'll check whether we are able to run code remotely on this machine. So I'll attach myself to session 3 that was just opened by Meterpreter, session 3. I will run sysinfo again to understand which machine we're currently on. And it's Maria's machine. That is very good. And we'll get user ID to see what is the level of privilege we're currently running on. And we're running as local system. Now that we're on the CEO machine, and we've been able to check this really easy, we're able to upload the data files from Maria's machine to the command and control server. Having accomplished what we wanted to do here, the last thing we want to do is cover our tracks. The technique we chose to cover our tracks is something we've been seeing more and more, and something we saw in operations like NotPetya. And it's to essentially wipe clean or encrypt all the data on the machines and make them unusable from the forensic analyst perspective. It's essentially a wiper that's masquerading as ransomware to reduce the suspicions. I want to make sure defenders aren't able to get the encryption key and decrypt the files. The specific ransomware I'll choose here is PowerWare. It is a ransomware that is written completely in PowerShell. Again, the PowerShell script is a native tool that will do the encryption itself and will evade any real-time detection tools as well. In my script, I'm going to create a temp folder. That is where we're going to upload the ransomware into. I've uploaded the ransomware into Maria's machine, and we've gone into a shell prompt in Maria's machine, and that's where we're going to run the ransomware from. I'm going to run the PowerShell script right here. PowerWare.rc. And that's it, folks. The ransomware is running. From the attacker's perspective, the machine is very quickly on its way to becoming unusable. I have completely covered my tracks, retrieved the target information I was looking for, and can wrap up this branch of the operation. Both victim machines we saw here have Cybereason agent installed in detection mode. Prevention mode would make my demo very short, as it would have broken every attack steps on the way. The only feature that I had enabled was a ransomware suspend feature to not allow ransomware to encrypt any files. Now let's go into the Cybereason's user interface and see whether we've got any visibility on the attack that I've just executed. For that, we'll go into the malop inbox and refresh. As you can see here, the malop inbox, or our high fidelity alert inbox, looks very similar to your Outlook or your web mail, where new alerts are going to be appearing at the top of the list. We can also see when did the specific operation we ran appeared in the user interface, and we can see each and every step detailed in English language of what has happened. It also, as you can see, groups relevant alerts into one when they touch multiple machines. So unlike any other solution, we will only alert you once with one incident across the entire environment. Now, let's dive deeper and have a look at one of the alerts generated to show you as an example what it looks like for the analyst. And I'll choose the initial successful phishing attack, which used a domain generation algorithm via excel.exe. Looking at this alert, we can see very detailed information about the operations that we performed. It includes the root cause of an attack, where xl.exe executed malicious use of domain generation algorithm. Usually, it takes weeks just to get to this part of information. The tools, techniques, and procedures that were used by the hacker. So any executables or any additional tools, we will see them mentioned here. The details of every affected user and machine inside a single alert. Details of network communications if they were associated. And of course, most importantly, the timeline. This means we can upskill level 1 analysts to have the understanding of an L2. And L2 analysts are much more effective in performing investigations, so level 3 analysts can free up some time to look at more complex situations, as well as work on another projects. Digging deeper into this malop and looking on it from a processes perspective, we see that the Outlook opened Excel spreadsheet, which then opened the child process called regsvr32. This is a built-in Windows tool which is verified and signed Microsoft executable, but it's not normal in the context. It is not normal for Outlook launching Excel and then launching regsvr32. On the same note, we also see that our tool picked up 99 unresolved DNS queries, which showcases the attacker attempting to reach out to a live domain to connect. What you just saw was a successful phishing attack to get in. We did it by establishing command and control connection via DGA, and we used fileless malware via PowerShell to achieve the goal. Then it was followed by process injection to evade detection, and we did it by migrating the attack code and hiding it inside of a Firefox browser. We then laterally moved to gain access to high-value data, and we did it by escalating privileges to steal credential hashes first, and then by laterally moving by leveraging a legitimate remote execution tool. And the last step was to cover tracks by wiping system drive, and we used fileless ransomware launched via PowerShell. So Cybereason is a cloud-based SaaS solution. However, this can also be run on-premise if necessary. In any case, we install an agent on the endpoint, which is used to collect metadata. We gather raw data from all the endpoints in your environment: laptops, Windows servers, Linux servers, Macs, virtual desktops, even containers. The amount of data we can access and analyze is huge and is unique to Cybereason's platform. It's close to 400 metrics on every endpoint and includes things like process execution, user logon logoff, file and registry changes, network communications, and more. Just facts, things we know happened in the environment. The first thing we do is apply threat intelligence. This is from sources like VirusTotal. We then use machine learning to identify the types of behavior that different types of malware exhibit in order to detect unknown or zero-day threats. We also use more sophisticated sources like Cybereason's Nocturnus research team and additional third-party feeds. We then take any known indicators of compromise or other available information and use machine learning to decide what is good and what is bad. So we can use this to stop known bad stuff. For example, behavioral signatures, which our next-gen AV component can use, will allow us, using a down selector approach, if we know it's bad, we can just block it there and then. We then automatically search for these indicators of compromise to see if they exist anywhere in the enterprise. We're mimicking what a team of excellent analysts would do in viewing threat intelligence and hunting their environment. But humans can't do this at scale or quickly enough to be effective. And we're doing this in real time, automatically, across the whole organization. Now, just looking for indicators of compromise isn't enough. So all the data and information we collect is sent to our in-memory graph database, which is effectively a purpose-built cyber analytics platform. The graph maps everything to everything in real time. Every system to process, to users, to registries, to files, to methods of communications, and so on. We see every interaction that takes place between these elements and build a real-time snapshot of the state of your environment. Now, when we find something of cyber threat, we mark that as evidence. By the way, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could be a precursor to a cyber attack, such as spreadsheet launching PowerShell. When we identify something as evidence, we're mimicking what the best analyst would do manually when acting on a hunch, only we do it in real time and at a scale. Many other solutions might actually raise these as alerts, which would quickly result in alert fatigue and false positives. We then take these pieces of evidence and further correlate them and apply additional algorithms to see if any of them are related. If multiple pieces of evidence are found to be related, we group them as suspicion. For example, Excel launches PowerShell and then that PowerShell connects to the internet. When we can tell a full story associated with a suspicion, it gets escalated to what we call a malicious operation, or MALOP for short. This MALOP alert tells us the full story of an attack, including root cause, which can be very hard to manually get to the bottom of, the scale of the attack, i.e. how many machines and users were involved, tools used by the attackers, methods of communication the attackers used against us, and perhaps most importantly, we establish the timeline of the attack. So in building a MALOP, we're essentially doing in real time what analysts might take days or a week to do. So from the in-memory graph database, correlating and making the data actionable through to the creation of a MALOP is what we refer to as AI hunting. We do this across the entire enterprise in real time, fully automated. Of course, sometimes we see that customers will want to manually proactively hunt through their own environment. So we provide the ability to query the graph database directly and in really simple but fast visual way. Finally, because we own the entire backend solution, we can build on it without relying on a third party to try and retrofit new features. So now we've also added some pretty cool features to actively prevent bad things from happening. These include traditional antivirus for signature-based detections, and also next-gen AV, which uses techniques like machine learning and behavioral analysis to block ransomware and provide protection against modern fileless malware. These are also configured and administered through the same console, and all these features exist inside a single lightweight agent on the endpoint. This gives us the ability to quickly detect threats and provide rapid time to remediation. What we showed today could only be done because of the way the Cybereason product was built, a purpose-built architecture created from the ground up. This is what our customers are telling us. This is the value they say they get from Cybereason. They say that we provide deep visibility into endpoint, behavioral, and system data across the entire enterprise. They told us that we evolve constantly to reduce the adversary's advantages. They also told that their analysts can now minimize their time and effort from detection to total understanding and remediation. And they do that because of the automation that the dynamic database provides them with. It provides with context to all malicious operations in real time. They're also more efficient because they're working on a single pane of glass. And last but not the least, they say that they were able to simplify their security operations with a single high-value partner, Cybereason. We hope you enjoyed that SAC-SIM. We'd love to hear your feedback. Thank you for your time, and now we'll open for questions.